And so you're sitting in the car, and there were other delays and things, and I'm getting closer and closer to running, and I'm going through all this stuff, and I'm watching the guys ahead of me leave the line, and you hear them just hammer on, and I'm just sitting there. I'm in the 9:35. This is cool already.
Road Scholars Live, fresh brewed and air-cooled deep tracks with Cam Ingram. I'm your co-host, Ray Schaefer, former GM of Brumos Porsche, a racer, speaker, now flying the flag at Porsche Classic here in the USA. My co-host is Cam Ingram, the owner of Road Scholars, multiple Concours, restoration-winning expert, author, and public speaker. Cam and I are two passionate Weissau enthusiasts whose work requires a daily drive down deep tracks into Porsche history and heritage. And today, that means we're talking with the Porsche Renaissance man himself, Mr. Jeff Zwart. Cam, this episode once again proves solidly why we decided to call our show Deep Tracks. With the Road Scholars connection, the Ingram Collection's 935, one of 77 very special cars being set up to run at Pikes Peak this year. Here we go. We get involved with an 8-time Pikes Peak International Hill Climb champion himself, Jeff Zwart.
I'm really excited about this episode. Ironically, Jeff and I and my family, we didn't really have time to debrief after the race. So I'm really looking forward to talking about his mindset and his experience inside the car and as the event unfolded. So this is a really rare chance to have a deep track with one of my favorite people and most accomplished guys in the Porsche world, Jeff Zwart. So
yeah, without a doubt. Yeah, I mean, For sure, we could go on for hours and cover everything with Jeff, from his racing at Pikes Peak to his road racing to his film business and the photography, his involvement with Porsche and commercial making, filmmaking, book writing, photography, road and track. There's just so much history with Jeff, and he's such a humble guy. If you bumped into him in the store, you would never realize you're talking to an 8-time grand champion. But I'm so excited to speak with him today and really, like you said, get inside that mindset of what does it take to be an 8-time champion at a place as incredible as Pikes Peak in Colorado.
Let's go down this deep track with the Porsche Renaissance man, Jeff Zwart. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Well, Jeff Zwart, welcome to Fresh Brewed and Air-Cooled Deep Tracks. It's a pleasure and an honor to have you here with us today, post Pikes Peak, the 98th running, 2020.
Yes, it's great to be here and great to join you guys. And, you know, it's kind of it's a 14,115 foot peak, and it leaves you on a high on multiple ways. And certainly this year delivered with the car I got to drive and the results we had and the friends we made and the friends we brought together. So it was really a great year, and I'm happy to be with you guys and talk about it a little bit.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for that. We're excited to have you here. And for those of us, I mean, we've known each other for years, the three of us, but for the benefit of those who might be just joining in, quick background: how did you get interested in Porsche? And obviously, we're going to arc from that all the way to what you just accomplished out in Colorado.
Yeah, from my standpoint, the Porsche connection obviously runs quite a ways back, and it really comes through my father, and he was the one who was interested in sports cars in general, and obviously sports cars and living in Southern California led you to the racing side of things with Riverside Raceway and Laguna Seca and Sears Point all being West Coast racetracks that we could go to. And there was always these cool sounding cars that were different than everything else in terms of their sound and even their look that were at the racetrack. So, that kind of trifecta of things of what my dad had brought and the street car side of things and the racing side just kind of really attracted me to Porsche. And, as a kid, I never dreamed of racing a Porsche or doing anything that way with the Porsche. I just loved being around them. And so ultimately, you know, the first car I ever drove was chassis number 35, 911, which is fairly well storied at this point. But, you know, at that time, it was just an old 911, but it was very special for me to get to drive it. And that day in an empty parking lot to learn how to drive a manual transmission and wheel a car yourself as a 15-year-old kid. That was my introduction. But, you know, as things laid out, and especially, you know, we're here with road scholars too, who dig into all the details of, you know, the vintage Porsches. You know, I learned to drive in chassis number 35, and it would be, if it was around today, it would be a very important car. And you know, I worry sometimes somebody's going to find it. I'm going to have to buy it again. But you know, I did learn to drive in that car. And then my first car out of high school that I was able to spend my own money on was a 1979 14.6. So, you know, that 6-cylinder motor and that flat six sound that was so unique at the time still plays out behind my head in multiple cars, and I just really enjoy it. So my connection to Porsche has really been very special because that's the roots of it. And then I've ended up doing a great deal of Porsche's advertising through the years, both in my still photography career and in my filmmaking career. So, you know, bridging those two things and then being able to race along the way has been very special.
Well, you know, you mentioned your photography and filmmaking and art career and writing, of course. And I've got a guilty pleasure question I've always wanted to ask you. I received from Porsche a long time ago when I was a kid, I received this wonderful poster of a 930 turbo, the back end of it jumping through the air. And they had printed everybody's name on the vanity plate. In fact, Jerry Seinfeld had one famously hanging in his apartment on the TV show. And I'm curious, how many, you took that photograph, how many takes what did it take to get that shot?
That's a great question, Ray. That's a good one. I like that.
And you know what? This will probably be the first time I've talked about it on camera, but it is, you know, certainly it is one of the more iconic print ads I ever shot. You know, and I would rank it up there also as one of my favorites too. But, you know, between Jerry Seinfeld and everybody getting it with their name on it, it was a pretty special photograph. But the backstory to it is somewhat interesting because in those days, I had a really great relationship with the agency, which was Fallon in Minneapolis. And I worked very closely with the art director, Mark Johnson, creative director on the account. And we kind of went out with headlines, and the headlines were just great headlines that the agency would write. And I would usually have a couple cars and a trailer that was hauled around with us and a van full of photography gear. And we would kind of travel with the cars and with the headlines. And we knew with that particular headline of why most rocket scientists are German, it was something we wanted to try to do a jumping shot, but we really didn't have the location. So we were driving along up towards Mammoth, and I saw a gravel road next to the paved road we were on, and it appeared to have this kind of rise in it that was a nice downhill rise. And we also had a Volvo station wagon that I drove, and then my crew was in a van. And so I said, well, why don't we test jump the Volvo over this jump, so and see how it works before we break out this brand new black 930. And so I jumped it, and it felt really good, and it was a great landing and everything about it. And I thought, well, I want to see what it looks like. And so our precision driver got in the Volvo, and I stood on the other side with my camera just to see whether it would work. And he jumped the Volvo, and it just came off the ground a little bit. And I said, oh, no, you bring up the speed a little more. And, you know, I think it'll be good. And so next run, he comes up over, and it's suddenly like Dukes of Hazzard. My Volvo station wagon is like way off the ground. It misses the downhill landing. It lands on the flat part of the road, and it literally mashes the front suspension up to it actually bent the front suspension so much that the wheels were frozen on the front of the car. They were so smashed against the struts. So he goes, well, what do we do? And I said, well, we get the car out of the road. And he goes, but the front wheels won't turn. And I said, well, I got in it. I just drove it off the edge of the road, pushing the front wheels. And we left it next to the side of the road. And he goes, well, what do we do now? I go, you get the black turbo out. We're going to shoot this. So, needless to say, he was a bit intimidated after totally auguring in my Volvo station wagon into the earth. So, and I give him this brand new black turbo. And so he drove the turbo over one jump. And again, it was just a little bit off the ground. And I said, just take it up a little bit more. And he did. And it launched off the ground, and we got that shot. And I shot it on 2 takes. And when it landed, it kind of landed, and it was a gravel road. So there were some rocks that flicked up and everything. And actually it got a couple chips on the front end of the car. But everybody was so in love with the shot. I thought, we're all good. This is great. And so I just didn't test fate. I said, okay, 2 takes, that's all we need to do. It's going to be okay. And, in those days you didn't have digital, so you weren't looking at the images, but I knew in my heart that I'd gotten the shot. And so we put the turbo away carefully and continued on with our shoot. Well, what I didn't realize, Porsche had borrowed that car from a dealership.
Oh,
and actually a dealership in Bakersfield. And so, I was dealing with my Volvo that I had to leave next to the side of the road up by Northern California. And it turned out that the dealership contacts me all mad about chipping the car, getting chips in this brand new turbo. And I'm thinking, well, I just took the car off the truck. I figured it was Porsche's car, but it was a dealer car. So there was quite a to-do about it. And we finally got back to the studio several days later, and it didn't die down. And there was kind of all this who did what and who's paying for what and how bad was the car and everything. And I just knew that the car wasn't that bad. It had a couple chips in it. But anyway, long story, the problem goes away from my standpoint. I think it was all taken care of by Porsche. And so the posters come out, and I get a call from the dealer, and I go, oh no, I'm going to, this is raising its head. He says, I have a bunch of posters. Could you sign them for me? So after all this, a 2-take shot, a couple chips, lots of drama, but it all ended up good, and everybody was happy, and it became a very iconic photograph. But the Volvo did not come out well.
It's a great story.
It might be one of those few instances where rock chips added value to that car after the
I agree. It really was funny, but the dealer was nothing but a big friend of us from then on. So it worked out very well.
Awesome. Well, so you got the racing bug. The racing bug bit you at some point, and I know you went and did formula racing, but eventually you ended up with an interest in rally racing and things like the Baja 1000, and even more recently the Trans-Siberian Rally back in 2007. What is it about rally racing that captured your attention?
My world of filmmaking is kind of an adventure. I travel all over the world, and we go to the greatest roads on earth, and we go down those roads and look at, the best locations for everything, and you deal with the environment, you deal with the weather, and you deal with all these things that happen that happen as they do around the world. And so I was really attracted to that same style of adventure in rallying, and that, we would race down a road that we'd never been down before. You've got a co-driver giving you notes, and you are just making it up as you go in a way that, using your skills, using your co-driver's skills, using the capabilities of your car. and going down something as fast as you possibly can, and against the weather, against the changing surfaces, against all the kind of craziness that rally has. And so it was kind of an extension of my own business. And I just really did enjoy that adventure side of it. And it took me to new places, and it took me kind of all over the United States and the back roads and things. And ultimately I drove in the World Championship Rally in New Zealand. I'm one of the few Americans that actually has competed in World Championship. And I just, that sort of adventure was really attractive because it was almost taking my daily life of filmmaking and then taking it a little bit higher with the high action side of it, of really physically experiencing it. And I love going against the weather. I remember, in Ohio and Pennsylvania, we would have these rallies that running at night, just pouring rains, literally rivers of water coming down the road. And I was running a career of 4, and you're just launching through this stuff, pushing through the forest, and headlights are hitting the trees and the cars sliding everywhere. And you catch the car ahead of you sometimes, and you just are focused on those taillights in the dark and through the fog and all sorts of things. It's just that sort of world, and then pushing through it as fast as you possibly could. It was an attraction that I absolutely loved. And that kind of segued for me into the greatest hill climb, which was Pikes Peak, and again, in those days, Pikes Peak was all dirt, and it had snow and rain and hail and all those kind of things. And while it wasn't a stage format rally like I was running in the US Pro Rally Championship, it was still one of the, if not the greatest roads on earth. And you drove up it fighting all those elements. So that was the attraction. It was such an extension of my real world of filmmaking.
Well, that's awesome. I'm hoping that you and Cam can then give me some detail about, you've said Pikes Peak is the ultimate rally, and I'm curious about, what makes it so. I haven't been there, but you guys were just there, and I would love to know more of the details about Pikes Peak. Everything from, I'm a road racer. And so when you show up at an event, you go to the paddock area. That's where all the transporters are. That's where the cars are. And you just work from there. But I understand at Pikes Peak, you're basically working your way up as you practice. You're going up from different levels. I want to know all about that, because I don't think I really have an appreciation or understanding of how difficult it is to compete in this place that you call the ultimate rally.
Yeah, and I think that rally people kind of say, well, it's not really a rally, and that's true. I think that it's a rally style road, but the thing, if you just kind of break it down to, it's 12 and a half miles, it's 156 turns, it's an altitude gain of about a mile, starting at 9,000 feet, finishing at 14,115 feet. So you take that, but imagine if Pikes Peak was laid out on a flat ground. It would be the most fascinating road you've ever driven on. It has hairpins, it has sweeping turns, it has slightly banked turns, it has a little bit of kind of braking zones that are both downhill and uphill and all these kind of things. But on a flat surface, it would be an incredible 12 and a half miles to drive. Okay, now take that road and put it on the side of a mountain, and one of the most storied, beautiful mountains in Colorado, and one of the 14ers, a mountain over 14,000 feet high. But Pikes Peak is also unique in that it's not laid out in the Continental Divide. It's not the Continental Divide where everything is lined up and there's 14,000 foot peaks all the way along the Continental Divide. It sits on its own. And at the base of it is Manitou Springs and Colorado Springs. And, but you see it literally when you come out of the Denver airport and you start to drive south, you see it, it's standing out there. And so it makes it a really special space. And it also, because it's sitting there on its own, and, from to the east of it is basically flat plains to Nebraska and Kansas, it goes on forever. And to the west of it is the Continental Divide and massive mountains and an incredible Colorado Rockies landscape, but yet that mountain stands alone. So therefore it creates its own weather, because it's coming from the high areas of Continental Divide and dropping into the plains. It becomes a Venturi effect of all the air just sucking past it, but there's this point sitting in the middle of it, and that point all of a sudden creates these clouds around it, and it creates its own weather almost every single afternoon. So this is kind of a living, breathing organism that's just this massive mountain out there. And there's a road that goes to the top of it. And just by virtue of the Broadmoor and having this kind of Broadmoor Hotel and having this attraction that, you could go stay at the hotel and then drive up to the top of this mountain, it's really special in that world. So all of that adds up to being a very non-traditional race course, but something that, in global motorsports, it's an aspirational place, almost more outside of US than it is in the US because of the storied efforts of Peugeot and Audi and racing there in the earlier days, making a mark on the mountain that was out there in Colorado, but it was an international event that really told that story.
Yeah.
I think also, Ray, what I've said this before in previous shows, and we've talked about it, like so much of our historical shows are about, Tour de France race or the Targa de Florio or Monte Carlo rally. And you think about these were events that were taking place in not, designed racetracks. These were public roads. And when you get to Pikes Peak, it's hard to understand that you get through the front gate of the Pikes Peak and you drive for quite a while before you even get to the staging area of where the pits are. And you quickly realize what a special event, and it's just very surreal. Like I said, it's like Woodstock and motorsports on steroids. And, unfortunately, there wasn't a crowd there this year because of COVID. But you get up there and there's no room on the mountain. There's all these haphazard pits everywhere and on the main road and on the side in these designated areas. And it's just organized pandemonium and just motorsports. And it's so intoxicating. And it's just so surreal to be there and to see it. It's really this, all access thing because you can walk around the teams. And it's really fascinating to see it in person.
So as I understand it, then, as you're climbing this grade, to get to the top of the 14,000 feet, I mean, you're obviously going to be dealing with some the cost of a mistake. Sounds very different from what it might be on a road course.
Yeah, it's because you aren't revisiting turn 6 every minute and 42 seconds. It's a different place. It's very hard to get data. It's very hard to run things back to back because it's such a long course. And you can imagine, just in the hours that you practice, we start practicing, this year, we probably had enough light around 6 o'clock in the morning, 6:15 in the morning. But, normally we're in the 5:30 range. This year for Pikes Peak, it was delayed 2 months, so it changed where the sun was and how the sun rose. But even that, we start in generally freezing temperatures, 30, 32 degrees, and then just through the morning of us practicing, which we're done at 8:30 in the morning, you end up getting a temperature change of 20 or 30 degrees. So it's really hard to get anything back to back on any information from tire testing to the car to whatever. So it's so unique because the race itself is held later in the day. So all of your practicing you did while you learn the course is going to feel entirely different on race day. And you're right, there's no runoff, there's no kitty litter on the sides of the track. For the most part, there's no real guardrails. So there's just not much to happen, and I not much to save you if you make mistakes. And it's an interesting dynamic because we are doing something now on a road that doesn't have corner workers everywhere either. So you don't know what the surface is like. Is somebody ahead of you drop coolant or had a problem
flags.
Or has somebody put rocks on the course by ditch hooking somewhere. So you're constantly reading and scanning and looking at the road to try to figure out, is the grip level the same as the last time I went through this? And I went through the same corner maybe 30 minutes ago, because of the way the practice session goes. We run and then we wait at the top and then we roll back down and then we start over again. But that whole process takes another 30 minutes. So it might be 30 minutes and 30 cars later that you're back to that same corner So to say that it's the same place, same amount of grip, you're always reading that, feeling the car. So it's a challenge. And I think the nice thing is, I'm not the youngest guy there, but I, can really turn back to my experiences there. And I think that it's a place, I also term Baja 1000 as so complex, and to get through the 1,000 and get from the top of Baja to the bottom of Baja, it's a lot of experience comes into play of that. And Pikes Peak, while it's only 12 and a half miles, the amount of things you have to deal with and the changing situations, the experience really does play off as opposed to absolute raw speed.
And that segues into something I really want to ask you, Jeff, because being there and seeing you, you had an intense week. Two things I wanted to ask you, and I didn't bother you while we were there, was, it's been 5 years since you raced the Peak. We came up with this crazy idea, my father and yourself, to race the 935. That was quite something to announce to the world. So some pressure there. And then what other people don't appreciate, and I saw firsthand, is your focus, not just on the event, but also your other responsibilities of coaching for other participants in the Porsche program and making sure they safely and fastly get up the peak. And just watching you all week and then doing all your VIP responsibilities and your media stuff, it was amazing to watch your energy and your focus. So can you talk a little bit about those two circumstances? A, coming into this, announcing this intense agenda, and then your responsibilities on the peak.
Yeah, that's part of the thing that I really like about Pikes Peak. And again, it's like my commercial world. I will prep a job. I will, location scout and have all the things go on with agencies and everything. But it comes to shoot days. Shoot days is you have to work with blinders on. You just need to be like totally focused. And because there's one thing you can't change on those days is that the sun is going to set and you have to be done, and we don't in the commercial world, we don't go, oh, I didn't get that, let's come back tomorrow. That doesn't work. That's it. It's fine. You need to be done, and you need to execute a commercial on time, on budget, everything in it. But it is so complex and so massive, and it takes a lot of focus to get through those 1 or 2 days that you're shooting. And I like the way that week builds up at Pikes Peak of practice, 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 and then it's race day, and you just have to deliver. There's no pit stops, there's no second runs, there's no laps and things to get it right or anything. It's just one run to the summit. And the parallels to the filmmaking world and that are a lot alike. And I think that the focus I've developed in my own career of filmmaking really applies to my motorsport career, especially since it's based around Pikes Peak these days. And you're right, your father was, such a special person, and to be at dinner, late last year actually, and sit there and say that, I have your father telling me I have a 935 coming. I don't really know exactly what we can do with it, but would you be interested in running it at Pikes Peak? And just to have that kind of gel out of a dinner, that was just kind of magical, because when that car was introduced at Rennsport, I looked at it, I go, we've been building these cars, these, kind of Frankenstein cars of turbocharged cup cars and things that didn't exist. And here it was coming straight out of the factory, exactly what I wanted to run at Pikes Peak. So, that alignment. And so all of that at dinner sounded like such a great idea. But once I got to Pikes Peak, you realize this is a high-profile car. There's only 77 of them in the world. And at the end of Pikes Peak, you don't want there to only be 76 in the world. So that, as much as, I'd like to say, oh, no, it was cool, there was some pressure. And it, obviously it's a very expensive car too. But, I will honestly say that the financial end didn't weigh as heavily on me as the idea that if I did have a problem in that car on Pikes Peak, it would be the Porsche news story of the year, if not the decade. And you think of all the things that, for me at least, that I've done at Pikes Peak and I've done in racing, and I've had such a wonderful alignment with Porsche through the years. And, but it would just take one incident at Pikes Peak. And I could, if I was in a cup car, it could kind of disappear. It's like, oh, you heard Jeff, had a little off in Pikes Peak and no big story. But 935, that was going to be a big story. So, that was always in the back of my head. But I got to say, the car was just so good. And it was just so fun for me to drive. And you're right, I really haven't raced anything significant for 5 years. And so to come back in with that car, it was a big car, but it worked so well. And, I felt like I'd kind of skipped some steps because the last cup car I'd driven was an early generation, 997 cup car. And so it was, to jump into this with all of the, ABS and traction control and yaw controls, everything in it, and stability management, all the things it did, and then having the latest, greatest, everything from motorsport in it, and then to be a turnkey car, underneath all that amazing carbon fiber bodywork, it was a street car. It was a car you had to have your foot on the brake, you had to have the gear in the right place before you could turn the key in the ignition, just like the street car. And so that combination of things was just kind of super cool. But for me as a driver, I thought, wow, there's a lot more things that can work to my advantage in this car that I don't really know about. And so I had never driven a car with ABS. I'd never driven a paddle car. I'd never, there's just so many things I hadn't experienced. And so my learning curve is probably the greatest at Pikes Peak as it's been in any prior year, just except for probably 1994 when I first went there with the turbocharged Carrera 4. It was so much to learn, but at the same time, it just complimented me. I felt like when I drove the car at Willow Springs, I thought, this car just suits me. The feedback I'm getting in it, the enjoyment I have of just driving it, it just suited me. And it did never once, the entire time I drove it, did it do anything funny where it's go, well, that was weird. That was, I didn't mean to do that or whatever. It just delivered all the time. And I just was so impressed with that. And it gave me such a comfort level in it. And yet my week was quite complex. And while I hadn't been there in 5 years or had really raced in 5 years, I've been coaching the last 2 years in the GT4 Club Sport class that's run by Yokohama and Porsche Motorsport. And it's a wonderful class, especially an entry-level class. And the competitors there come from varying degrees of background of competition. And so I coach them all. And, the last couple of years, every afternoon, I take people up on the mountain. I talk to them about the run and how it works and all that sort of thing. And so I really almost knew the mountain better than I've ever known it because I verbalized it every single day, 2, 3, 4 times a day to different people through the last 2 years. And so this year I was with Daniel Armbruster's blessing, who's the president of Porsche Motorsport North America. His blessing was I could coach and I could race this year as long as I had a turnkey car. Well, thank you to Mr. Bob Ingram. I had a turnkey car. In the case of the 935, I could coach. And so that balance of days just kept me on the mountain all day long, every day. And I really enjoyed it. And I think that's what's great is I don't get a chance to race a lot anymore. And so to come there for the month of August and say, I'm fully immersed in Pikes Peak. I'm not going to deal with anything from my filmmaking world, from my photography world. I'm just going to be a racer that month. And I'm coaching at the same time and all that stuff. It was a full immersion on Pikes Peak. And because I consider Pikes Peak home and literally the least intimidating place I could drive on earth, it was just fun. It was just a great month. And that car, just walking up to it, the visual of it would reward you, let alone, you slip over that roll cage and you drop into the seat and you've got this half steering wheel and you turn the key and all these lights light up like a Christmas tree that I've never seen before in a race car. It was just kind of magical to get in that car every day, and it has air conditioning. It's like it was such a fun experience in that car.
I have to say, when my parents and I walked up to the car and saw the livery in person for the first time, it was special. Ray, it was just like the car in person. I mean, everyone has seen the graphics, and the mobile one, Pegasus, is just iconic on it. But Wade and yourself, Jeff, did such an amazing job with the graphics. The livery looks so good.
Oh, well, thank you. And that really was a nice thing because I did come back. You know, I've had sponsors through the years, and I've really never ever had the response I did this year in terms of sponsorship. And it was really a kind of a nice situation that happened, that everybody that had been involved with me in the past came on board again, and including you guys at Road Scholars, and then to have, you know, the Mobile One connection again, which has always been so good to me, and then Michelin, who's just supported so many great programs of mine through the years, even from the BF Goodrich side of even Panama, Alaska. I drove a 914.6 from Panama to Alaska for 25 days and 10,000 miles. You know, Michelin and BF Goodrich were a part of that. So people that have been involved so long to bring it together. And that's what's kind of nice, is you touched on it earlier. Pikes Peak's a combination of grassroots racers and full professionals. I mean, where could you pull up on the line behind Sebastian Loeb or Romain Dumas in your home-built BMW monster car to run at Pikes Peak and pull in behind one of those guys and leave the line, you know, and practice? It's so special that way. And Pikes Peak kind of becomes a family that way, where people really rely on each other. And you know, it's as much as there's sponsorship and teams trying to beat each other and do things, there's also a very communal feeling. I mean, Yokohama takes your tire pressures, even if you are running a different brand of tires. You know, it's just everybody's there to kind of help everybody else. And I really do like that, and it makes it special. But it was certainly special to have my long-term sponsors on board for this program too.
Well, your whole experience, you've become an 8-time class champion, King of the Mountain at Pikes Peak, all in a Porsche, from, as you started talking about, from the early 90s all the way up to now. So to see that arc from the 911 C4, the 964, and to see that develop, you mentioned the putting the turbo motor into the to the car. That extra motor came from the car on the picture behind me here, right? The
Exactly.
I don't know if you noticed that. So the little Brumos connection on that one. But and then, of course, to tie it all up here in 2020 with this amazing one of 77, a future classic based on a classic Porsche. It's such a neat story that's been written. And kudos to you and to Bob and to Road Scholars and everybody who can for pulling that all together. You know, our good friend, our rally safari friend, Jim Goodlett, and I often talk about winning versus racing as a mindset. And bear with me on this for a moment, but if a racing mindset is a narrow and thus it doesn't afford time to react fast enough when you're concentrating on what's at the edge of the hood, in a reactionary mode of a racing mindset, as your speed increases and more variables are thrown into view, it becomes a necessity that the competitive focus shifts from surviving the moment and thus, you know, dodging the car in front of you or compromising the corner ahead. Where conversely, drivers that focus more on a winning mindset have a vision to the horizon, as well as look through multiple corners ahead. So in a winning mindset, you go faster requires essentially preparatory work with focused, deliberate inputs based on a broader situational awareness. So in short, racing is reactionary and winning is calculatory. So as an 8-time champion, will you speak to what it takes for a competitor at Pikes Peak to transition from simply racing the mountain to becoming king of the mountain?
Well, you know, I think that that's an interesting description, and it certainly plays into virtually every race I've been involved with at some degree and level. It was interesting. There's certainly been times at Pikes Peak where I have just been in take no prisoners kind of, you know, mode. And I've, you know, even put pieces of tape on my steering wheel, just say attack. You know, it just is like, it's a place where you just have to suck it up and just go for it, you know. And I think that there was maybe a little bit of a balance for me this year. And it was an interesting one just because, I knew also I needed to set a good example for the people I was coaching in the club sport class. I didn't need to be that guy. And then, for the other reasons, I earlier stated, you just, if anything had happened to one of the 77 935s, we would have been, a big news story. So there were a lot of balances in it. And it was kind of funny how it played out for me in the week, because I found that when I needed to go fast, I could go really fast in the car. I just wasn't wanting to risk the car on every single run. But when I would get to the end of a practice session, I would generally run my fastest run, and I would run it quite a bit faster than the earlier ones, just because, okay, this is my time. Let's see how this goes. I've made 5 or 6 runs in this section. Let's let it rip and see how it goes. And so this year on race day, it was quite funny because David Donahue had been very quick in one of the club sports in our class, and he'd been quick all week. But, I had seen along the way photographs of how far he was running into the ditches and how much commitment he was driving in and everything else. And, even heard from the crew that they couldn't get the under trays off the car because they were so beat up underneath and, these kind of things. And you go, so then your mind's going, well, that's where the 2 seconds are or the 3 seconds are. You kind of can start to think about, okay, well, I understand how that car is going that quick. And then David Donner, who the Donner family is really the original Porsche family on Pikes Peak, and really kind of, I love the scenes of his father driving up there in multiple cars through the years and in the dirt days. And David and I have been very close, and actually his family honored me, I think in 2010, by giving me the Donner Family Award. So they're a very special Pikes Peak family. And so David came back also to race a GT2 club sport, and we kind of were always within seconds of each other and had a good time. But generally, David was a little quicker in some sections than I was. And for some reason at the top, I was very, very quick this year. And so all those kind of factors play in on race day. And so in my mind, I thought, I can generally go quite a bit quicker when I need to go quicker. And there's a certain amount of risk. And there's a lot of risk management in the place anyway. But I just kind of had calculated a lot of things in my head. And in qualification, David Donahue went absolutely fast, and the BBI boys had massaged the car a bit, and it was a great performance. So I kind of in my head went into the race day saying, okay, David Donahue is going to be really fast. David Donner is going to be right here with me. The other 2 open wheel cars are very close to us in time. So I can kind of see how it's going, but I know the open wheel guys as well as anybody. Paul Dallenbach's a really good friend, and I know that Paul on race day can always put one down. And so I know that, you kind of know everybody, all the players in it. So, but the funny thing that happened this year is I'm preparing, pulling on my gear, standing there, and I'm kind of trying to make sure that all my club sport competitors got off the line. And I've been running back and forth between their cars because they went ahead of us. And so, I kind of got all those guys up the mountain and knew they'd all gotten to the top safely. So I'm now starting to focus on my own program. And I see David Donahue leave, and I saw him leave, and he just left in the full commitment like I'd seen him do all week. And he's on it. He's good. And you listen. I can hear him go through the gears. I can hear him, up. In my head, I know how far up that corner was, and I can hear how hard he's pushing. All this kind of things that I've listened to for years. And then there's kind of this weird vibe, like something had happened, and I can tell. I'm looking across at Batim, who's watching the monitors up there, and Batim from BBI, and I could see because Batim had been on my crew for 3 years. I know Batim well, and I can tell when it's going well and when it's not. And I saw him turn away from the monitor, and I just could tell something had happened. And so suddenly when I, got the word and everything, and literally the moment I'm dropping into my own car, that David Donahue had, touched the outside wall and gotten a flat tire. it kind of like all of a sudden go, wow, this is kind of a wide open thing right now, where suddenly one guy who had clearly been faster than everybody was out of the race, and it left the four of us who were all pretty close. And I kind of, almost like the mind went to, hey, I could win this thing overall, kind of thing. And yet, it was, and so you're sitting in the car, and there were other delays and things, and I'm getting closer and closer to running, and I'm going through all this stuff, and I'm watching the guys ahead of me leave the line, and you hear them just hammer on, and I'm just sitting there. I'm in the 9:35. This is cool already. So I come up to the line, and I just thought, just see how it feels. And it was just funny. I left the line, and it felt good, but I was spending a lot of time just getting a feel of the road and things in it. And it shifted funny for some reason in a couple shifts in the very early on. And I was trying to decide, is it me? Is it what setting am I in? Because, this isn't a basic car. You change settings, you can do a lot of things in it. And so you kind of like doing that. And then you kind of go, okay, hey, it's feeling really good, but I spent way too much time early on getting this thing kind of, getting my head dialed in of what was going on in the car, and then the surface and everything was new. And I just thought I spent way too much time there. And I just knew in myself that I'd gone slow in that opening segment. So I decided to just start putting my head down and push harder and harder. And I just went faster and faster and faster up to the top. And at the end, I set the fastest time of the day in the upper segment. And to explain maybe the upper segment, I don't like it. It's so fast. I mean, it is virtually everything is over 100 miles an hour up there. And it's above 12,000 feet. There's no trees left. There's no guardrails in the top section. It's just wide open, flat out, turning against the sky with no reference. And it doesn't add up to a comfort zone, but yet, I was able to go faster than anybody else up there. But it really came from that start at the bottom, just knowing, hey, I lost time. I knew I'd lost time. And so I get to the top, and it's funny because it's, you just put everything on the line, and you've spent 10 minutes absolutely flat out. You come across the finish line, and in the case this year, it just got bumpier and bumpier in the course as we went to the top. And literally, the car is launching off the ground in places. There's a great shot that we got from a photographer up there that, the front wheels are literally off the ground. I'm like popping a wheelie through the bumps and everything. And it's wild, the finish, because it is just bouncing you and jumping the car, and you land and hope you get enough compression to have enough traction so that you can go the direction you want to go. And it's just, instead of things slowing down and getting more comfortable at the end, it just ramps up the experience at the end. So coming across the finish line, you absolutely are standing on the brakes because it transitions to dirt right away. And then I came in, and I'm sitting in the quiet of the car. I'm letting it run, making sure all the temperatures are good, looking at everything. And I'm looking around, and I see them interviewing drivers out of their cars that had run ahead of me. And I could just tell that at least I hadn't set any records, because they were still focused on the other guys, but I didn't know where I'd really landed. I just knew that I had really pushed hard at the end. And you get out of the car, and it just feels so good to be up there. And then when they, came over and told me that I was, I was fifth overall, and I was second in class, and the upper sector fastest time of the day, and kind of all that stuff started coming to you. It was just like, this is a good week. We're on point. We've had a great week, and everybody's just done, from my crew standpoint. Joey Seeley at Emotion Engineering set up the car, and that car was so good and so comfortable. And Joey knows from the 3 years I ran in 2013, 14, and 15, he engineered that car. So he made this kind of monster 900 horsepower car I drove there last. He made it comfortable in those days. And then he took the modern chassis and everything that Porsche had in the latest, greatest, and developed it into being the perfect package for me to drive there. It was so good. And his setup was so nice for me. And to have that week without ever even scuffing even the bottom of the car, I just felt like this was a good week. And then the surprising thing to me is that, you go into the event, and I've run it so many times. This is my 18th time, that you kind of can calculate what your time's going to be. And I thought, I ran a monster car in 2015. It really had 800 or 900 horsepower. It was aggro. It was, sequential gearbox, and it had the best of the Michelin tires on it. It had the best of the motor that BBI could build. It had everything on it. And it was all about Pikes Peak. There wasn't a single road going thing in that. It was about running 12 and a half miles at Pikes Peak. So when I got my time, I was shocked because I thought I would never be close to the time of my last 2015 car, the last car I won at Pikes Peak with. But I went 3 seconds, almost 4 seconds faster in the 935. And I just was like, this is so amazing for me, for not being around, for 5 years, and to come back with this car that was so magical to drive, and then to go the quickest time I'd ever driven before. It just felt really, really good. And it just, couldn't have done it without everybody being involved and supporting and everything about it. But it wasn't, the time was just a time that I had never expected to get out of that car. And it was so cool.
And Ray, I can attest, I'm shocked that the car raced, because when you do look underneath it and the wheel wells with the wheels off, it looks brand new still. It's mind-boggling. Jeff took excellent care of the car. So it looks like a brand new car still. So credit to Jeff and Joey Seeley and the team.
Yeah. Well, that is an awesome answer to my question, Jeff. Thank you for all that detail. I mean, every athlete, every elite athlete, has an optimal intensity level for peak performance. And apparently, when it comes to throttling up and throttling down to get into that zone, you clearly know how to do it. And I love that answer. Thank you so much for that. I mean, you talked a little bit about racing the double Davids up there. I mean, David Donahue and David Donner. And I mean, there's other folks up there as well. But I mean, you were in a very competitive class. Your time ended up second fastest in the class on the podium. I mean, just an amazing and kudos to David Donner for setting the fastest time in the GT2 RS Club Sport that was the 000 entry. What a great story, though. I mean, it just a phenomenal story. So you have all this going on, like you said. You focused on that for this month-long adventure at Pikes Peak, and I guess the only question is, how does an 8-time Pikes Peak International Hill Climb champ relax after all that in a year like 2020? And it turns out that you guys came up with another really cool idea. You were cruising Piëch to Peak in your own 906 with a few like-minded friends. What's that all about, Cam?
Well, I had to give credit to my client and good friend, Ed Anderson from Massachusetts. We sold him a 906 chassis 110. And when we sold him the car, he said, I have this great idea. I want to drive the car from my home in Vail to Aspen, over Independence Pass and back. I said, well, that's a really nutty idea. And over the next 4 months, as things transpired, we actually had other clients come into our building, see his car, and said, well, of course, I want one too, a 906. So in a very short time period, Steve Serial and I actually happened to find 2 other really great cars. So, and of course, I know Mr. Zwart's classic 906 chassis 109. And I called Jeff and I said, hey, I know you're busy with Pikes Peak preparation and everything, but what do you think of this idea? And that's really how it transpired. And so we spent 3.5 months preparing 3 906s that had been off the road for over a decade. And so we went through every aspect of the car, from the brakes, suspension, most of the fuel systems. We had to rebuild, replace all the fuel bladders. So it was quite an intense experience, but everything went flawlessly. And it was one of the most enjoyable trips that I can ever remember ever doing. So, How about you, Jeff? What did you think of
Oh,
it?
well, no, it was, I've owned my 906 for almost 25 years now. And, the kind of the premise of getting it was the fact that I could road register it. So I've had it, on the street ever since I've owned it. And I've had it back and forth between Colorado. So when I heard about this, I thought, oh, this is really great. And I actually had my car up on Independence Pass many years ago, but, I drive my car so much and it's so dialed in, and I thought, well, this is a little tricky to take four cars total and expect that out of it. And I will say that what came out of it was just how flawlessly all the cars ran over the mountain and everywhere else. And it was really a good testament to road scholars getting those cars ready, because it isn't easy. You're taking old technology and putting it against the elements again of the Independence Pass is 12,095 feet. That's a hard task to even get things to run over at that altitude. And funny enough, 2 years ago, I was up there with the Red Bull Formula One team shooting Formula One cars up there. And, we had the same problems. Believe me, I was on phone almost every week with the Red Bull team saying, you guys are going to be driving at 12,000 feet. And they go, oh, we race in Mexico City. I go, yeah, that's 6,000 feet. This is twice as high as that. So then the Red Bull team came through, and the Formula One car ran great up there for the film I was working on. But it was magical. And, I have spent so much time in my 906, and Kevin Jeanette, jokingly, I think at his event last year, said that, I was going to be the one to sort out the one that he had just finished restoring, because I had probably had more time behind the wheel of a 906 than any driver on earth. Well, I don't know that I can take that claim, but I do know I've had more time on the 405 freeway than any other driver in a 906. For me, what was super cool is that, I'm a visual person, and, that's my whole craft in my business. And to be driving for the first time in my 906 on the street and see other 906s around you, it's so cool. And just, the 906, Sam Posey gave me a great quote for when I did the 917 book. And I asked all these drivers of what it was like to drive a 917 for the first time. And he said, when I sat in the 917 for the first time, I felt like I was looking out of the mouth of a whale. And it is kind of like that. And I thought that's what the 906 feels. And, and the 906 has huge wheel arches, and it's got two Talbot mirrors up here that, sitting up there kind of way forward of you. And then you look in your rearview mirror through this yellow tinted glass that's all distorted and everything. And to be driving and look around you and out your front windshield, maybe one 906, and then your side mirror up on that high arched fender, there's another 906 in that mirror. And then you look through the distortion, and here's, Cam's dad, Bob, driving this red and white, beautiful 906E behind you through all that distortion. And it's like, that's pretty magical. That's filmmaking at its best. It's like being attached to, Aeroflex camera, being part of that. It was like so cool to see all that around you.
And I think Jeff really enjoyed himself, Ray, because for once I'm the guy yelling at people, 5 minutes, people. I'm being this director, and Jeff got to enjoy the experience without having to work too much. He certainly did work a little bit, but he was laughing.
You turned the tables. Yeah, you turned the tables on him for a change. But I understand you'd come up with another really cool idea that's going to turn the tables right back, and you're going to become the student to his instructor, as I understand it. What is that all about?
Yeah, I've decided that, I've been really working hard with Road Scholars for over the 20 years, and I've always wanted to race. And I've been infatuated, thanks to Fred Veach, and Jeff, who introduced me to Pikes Peak. I love this idea of dedicating my time over 3 years to really trying to understand the race and get up the hill safely and fastly. And so I'm going to run Pikes Peak here. So pretty excited about to do it with the GT4 class.
Cheers.
I'd like a formal announcement like that. I hear all these mutterings and rumors. So this is a formal announcement. So, I'm taking this back to Daniel at Porsche Motorsport right now.
Well, what better way to then just, now I have to definitely follow up, but this is definitely, it's been an ambition and dream of mine to do it. And it's just the right timing. So
kudos to you for walking the talk, Cam. That's awesome. You're very inspiring. You guys, I'm sitting between two very inspiring guys here this morning. That's awesome. That is awesome.
I will look forward to that for sure. So totally.
Well, Jeff, before we finish up, this was the 98th running of the Pikes Peak International Hill Climb. Are you a numbers guy? Does competing in the 100th, does that appeal to you? And anyway, is that something that you look at and think, I want my name to be on that entry list for the 100th running?
Yeah, I certainly would. I enjoy the whole process. You mentioned like delivery. Like I enjoy kind of bringing things back, and I'm a visual person, as I said, and I contacted my Super Bowl creative director from a Jeep project I did, and Wade Devers just made graphics and livery for this year's 935 that was just so iconic. And so all the process of developing the look of the car and the feel of the car and then the process of prepping and then racing, I just love all of that. And so naturally to come back on the 100th, it would be pretty special. And I've made a suggestion that I don't know how far it will go, but I'd like to see a champions class at Pikes Peak, which would maybe be 10 competitors racing in the cars they drove in the day. So to try to get Michel Moton back with an Audi and get, Rod Millen back with the Toyota Celica and get kind of all these kind of cars that would still be able to run there. And it's not about setting fast times or anything, but just bringing these things back and even more importantly, bringing back the drivers that have had championships there. So in my head, I'd like to bring back like the 2002 car, the 2015 car. There's something that I've had a championship in there. And I think that would really be a fun way to come back to it for me. And it would be a manageable way to come back. And, I also know how fortunate I was this year to, at this point in my motorsport career to get to drive a 935, that will always be a highlight. And certainly the Ingram family, Cam, but his dad is a saint to be able to say, hey, take my car. So, this is just such a special moment. And that's the important thing, is to realize that motorsport is about things aligning. When you look at the big wins, even at, there's always this certain alignment. It wasn't just flat out speed. There was something that aligned that made a particular effort really special. And for me, it was such a culmination of sponsors, such a culmination of friends, and such a culmination of a Porsche story for me. Because, when I came into the world of photography, I was photographing 935s. I was, photographing all the greats in motorsport, driving 935s at the very beginnings of my photography. So then to bring that back to now, and get to actually race a modern version of the 935 at the race that's the most special race to me, those alignments, you just realize that's special. And to say that I need to come back and do something else or do things, that's a hard one to beat. So it was a very special moment for this year.
Yeah.
Outstanding. I mean, you're right. It is quite the exclamation point on an incredible career at Pikes Peak. And that's very cool, Jeff. Congratulations again for your performance there. Cam, to you and your dad and everyone at Road Scholars for working to make that possible. I mean, making modern history and heritage, continuing that going for Porsche. I mean, like I said, it's a modern day classic. And I know this is a story we'll be talking about 20, 30 years down the road as well. It's just super, super cool.
I know. Go ahead, Jeff.
It's always special, and it's so much a level of family. And, my wife, Terry, was there, and she's been at every single Pikes Peak. And, if you asked her, she'd probably say, I don't really like Pikes Peak when my husband's driving. But, she's just such a trooper at that stuff. And, I always say, well, the good news is the longer you go there, the less time you have to wait for me to get to the summit. So this year proved that. She only has to wait, less than 10 minutes now. So, things are improving. But, it's a magical moment up there. And to have everybody there at the same time, even though there weren't fans there this year, we had the core and like I said, Joey Seeley looking after the car and Tom Ridings making sure it's everywhere. It was just a special year.
And I know I'm speaking on behalf of my family, Jeff. We can just say how proud and honored we were to do this with you. So proud of Jeff Seeley and his team, Tom Ridings, your whole support staff, amazing people. And it just really was an honor to do this with you. So thank you from all of our family for doing this with us. And you're wearing a collector's item because we sold out all the period correct 935 wear is gone. We sold it out, which is a first for Road Scholars. We've never sold out of any T-shirts, so it's pretty special.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Making more history there. Well, thank you, Jeff. We really appreciate you driving down these deep tracks, or should I say up the hill of deep tracks with us today and talking Porsche and making Porsche history. Thank you for that. What an inspirational conversation.
And thank you, Ray, and thank you for everything you do in the Porsche world for us too. So you've literally enlightened us in so many areas of the Porsche experience. So I really appreciate it. And Cam and the whole Road Scholars gang and Bob and Jeannie that brought Cam into this world. So it's a good thing all around.
Cheers to that.
Well, have a great day, Jeff. And thanks again for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Take care.
Wow. What an amazing hour with Jeff Zwart. Ray, what was your favorite takeaway from the whole deep track?
I'm always curious about the arc of going from racing to winning. I mean, he's an 8 times champion at Pikes Peak. It's such an incredible place to race up, like he described. It's like a road course, an incredible road course, but then you place it on the side of this 14,000-foot mountain. So to understand, to get inside his head and have him explain what it took to go from the approach of being there for the first time to then taking this new 935, one of 77 cars, and then humorously pointing out that he didn't want to end the weekend with there being just 76 left after that. I mean, that's a lot of pressure in itself. But to understand as an elite athlete how he operates to function in that environment while he's juggling all these other responsibilities, I just found that absolutely insightful and fascinating. How about you?
I think it was great to hear some of the insight of what was going on in race psychology. He was talking about as the race unfolded in Time Attack 1 class and what was going through his thoughts and his mind, and talking about how he was aware that he'd lost some time in the first stage. And then in the last stage, obviously the most difficult stage of the whole race of the hill climb, he had the fastest time of the day. And I just really appreciate, he's such a competitor. And then, being there for a week and seeing him in person, how focused he is, the consummate professional in every way, from how he manages his media responsibilities to his coaching responsibilities to race day. It's just inspirational to be around championship caliber people like Jeff.
Absolutely. You're spot on. And I'm so inspired as well by your commitment and what you're going to be doing. I think that's going to be fascinating to watch along and to watch that same arc develop in you. And that's going to be a fun one. So, and I'm just, again, for walking the talk, I'm so proud of you. Congratulations on that.
Well, I have to keep up with you, Ray, because you're out there driving and doing vintage and go-kart racing. So I'm just trying to up the ante. But this is something I've always wanted to do. And I'm at a stage in my life and with Road Scholars where I only have to work 12-hour days. So, I got plenty of time to cram in a race program now. So
that's right. We're not getting any younger. We might as well have fun. We got to speed up. We're running out of time.
And by the way, I didn't even acknowledge this new look. It's amazing. I love it.
Oh, thank you. It's been, all my friends are out in Pikes Peak having fun, and I'm at home and don't even have a podcast to do. So I figured I had to do something. So
amazing. Now we will get picked up by Spotify. There's no doubt.
Yeah, that's right. Either that or we can change the name from Fresh Brewed and Air Cooled to Bald Guys and Beards. That could work too.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Mass market for that.
Right. Well, thank you, Cam. I appreciate you hosting this again. And thank you all for tuning in to Fresh Brewed and Air Cooled Deep Tracks with Porsche Renaissance man, Jeff Zwart. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share our video and podcast. And of course, keep driving, enjoying, and sharing your classic Porsche passion. And like we always say, don't just go out and meet your heroes, get to know them. We encourage you to do that, just like we did today with our friend Jeff Zwart. So Cam, with great thanks from everyone at Porsche Classic, I say so long for now.
Ray Schaefer, I've missed doing these with you. So 2.5 weeks is too long to go without doing a Fresh Brew and Air Cool, but thank you for all your support. I love doing this show with you, and I hope our audience enjoys this show. So
right back at you.
Take care.
Till next time.